Welcome everybody to the Good Book Club. It is February 12th. It is Super Bowl Sunday. And so we're so excited that you guys have made the effort to be here. We're just glad book club doesn't actually conflict with the Super Bowl. Then I feel like we wouldn't have the turnout, but we are very excited to have everybody here today. So we always start out by reading our book club mission statement, just so we can remind ourselves what our purpose is and what we're hoping to accomplish. And I think Bruce today is going to read that statement for us.
Okay. The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies.
Oh, perfect, Bruce. I love to hear that read every time. That was awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're going to do a little recap on some things our book club members have been doing very quickly. A few of us, a group of us, went up to the Bear River Massacre site in January. Yeah, it wasn't January. It was a couple of weeks ago. That's right. I had to think for a minute. Anyway, it was an anniversary. It was a memorial. The amazing Darren Perry right there in the middle in the cute little pink beanie. He forgot to bring his own beanie, and he's wearing his toddler granddaughter's pink beanie. He gave a wonderful presentation. This is it's a very tragic, a very interesting story. There is a book associated with it. If you guys have not read this, it's called The Bear River Massacre, A Shoshone History by Darren Perry. So if you want some extra reading, grab that and read about it. It's a quick read, but it was a very moving ceremony and absolutely freezing, as you can tell from how we're dressed and the look on our face, which is like, get me to California. All right, perfect. Thank you for that slide. Okay, we'll go through a few little upcoming events before we get to our main book club meeting. I help John DeLynn run the Mormon Stories Book Club, and we are reading When the Moon Turns to Blood. It is a discussion about religious extremism, and it kind of details things in the Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell case. So this meeting is going to be a virtual live stream, a Mormon Stories podcast. It's going to be on March 3rd at 10 a.m. So if you guys would like to jump on with me and John DeLynn and the author, we're going to be talking about this at the beginning of March. So extra reading. Also, Bad Mormon, you probably have seen this in the press. This already dropped as far as John DeLynn doing the Mormon Stories with her. This was last week. Really interesting episode. And from what I'm hearing, really interesting book. So also extra reading if you guys want to pick that up. Another event that we have for those that are here in Utah, we've been talking about this for so long, but it's actually happening. We have our movie screening of The Return of Elder Pingree. He's a post-Mormon who returns to the mission field and kind of documents experiences there as he deconstructs. He's an Emmy award-winning filmmaker. He flew in 2 nights ago. Some of us got to go have dinner with him. He's just amazing. And this is a free event at Broovies Cinema Pub on Monday at 6 p.m. If you aren't here and you can't make it, this is available to rent on Amazon for only $2.99. I highly recommend everybody jump on Amazon and watch this. It's hard for me to describe what this film is. I can't quite find the right words. Most people who watch it are so touched, they end up in tears. It's just a beautiful, wonderful film that I feel, obviously post-Mormons will resonate. It will resonate with them a lot, but also, anybody in the Mormon faith who served a mission, I think there's a lot there to be gained for it. So anyway, that's my last plug for this because the event's tomorrow finally. Another bonus event that now we can focus on, this is coming up on the 28th. This is the amazing Dr. Randall Bell, PhD. I like how you put that in there, Melissa. He has written a new book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, that just came out a few weeks ago, and he has graciously agreed to come and talk to us. This is a bonus event. It's going to be on Tuesday. It's 7 p.m. We'll have the link out to everybody everybody. You don't have to have read the book to come and take part in the discussion, but if you'd like to, you can grab it. I think it's a fairly quick read. There's a lot of graphs and pictures in it, but anyway, he's awesome. You really want to come and interact with him, and he'll answer questions and talk to us. So we're going to be promoting this heavily. So, all right, our next book for next month is going to be Enlightenment Now, and Kevin is going to be our discussion leader. We are going to talk about this. Kevin's going to give a little preview for us at the end of our book club meeting. And this is going to be on March 12th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So we'll talk about this later, but we're really excited that we finally got into this one. Awesome. All right, what else? Oh, let's quickly go through any other media on the radar. In addition to books, there's some other things you can be participating in the Good Book Club. And we have the Good Media Club, where we kind of curate things that are out there in the media, podcasts, films, series, theater, things that have to do with Mormonism, post-Mormonism. And I put those all on a Facebook page. So you can join that. Just look that up. We also have the Good Book Club podcast, where we take these meetings and put them in podcast format. So you can listen to them while you're working out. We also have Landon and I do the Mormonish podcast, which is fun. We talk to actually a lot of you guys. None of you are safe. We'd like to have you on as guests. So that drops every Friday, and there's a Facebook page, and you can find it at mormonishpodcast.org too. And I think that finally brings us to why you are all here. The main event, The Body Keeps the Score. This has been very interesting to read this month and have people discuss on the Facebook page. It's been very, I want to say, difficult yet wonderful. And our discussion leader is Nancy Pratt, and we'll just let her take it away from here.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go to my slides and start the slideshow. All right, loading. Oh no, I didn't want to share. Sorry, hit the wrong button. There we go. All right, Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel Van Der Kolk. And I'm going to give you a overview. Part of the prologue is in here. So Dr. Van Der Kolk uses his own experience and research as a psychiatrist to describe and evaluate the effectiveness of some principal developments in the treatment of trauma patients. The book begins with a discussion of innovations such as the widespread prescription of drugs to treat mental illness and the use of brain imaging techniques by neuroscientists to understand the effects of trauma on the brain. In chapter 4, the central thesis begins to develop that dissociation is the essence of trauma, particularly dissociation between the body and the brain. Trauma victims physically relive the past, which is usually emotional responses which would allow them to feel love and trust shuts down in the body's attempt to survive a threat which no longer exists in the present. The aim of the book is to explore how best to treat trauma allowing those who've experienced it to gain control over their lives. So I've divided the book or the slides into the different parts of the book. There's 5 parts, and so there's several chapters. I'll give a brief synopsis of that section, highlight some things that I found interesting, and then we'll open it up to questions from or comments from you all. I'm trying to, okay. So the first part is the rediscovery of trauma, chapters 1 through 3. And this section emphasizes the mysterious nature of human psychology and responses to trauma in particular. It focuses on 3 approaches to trauma: the traditional talking cure, which derives from Freudian analysis, drug therapy used for treatment, and brain imaging primarily for diagnoses and research, which began in the 1990s. The author points out where these approaches have been helpful, then discusses their limitations. Because the author's name is a mouthful, a lot of times I will just say the author, but you can refer to him as Bessel or Dr. Van Der Kolk or he or however. So part 1 is a preamble in which the author provides background to his own approach. He introduces case studies to which he later returns, briefly explaining the origins of each patient's trauma. So as has already been noted, these case studies can make harrowing reading and emphasize the seriousness of the author's research and the work of others on which he relies. He makes the point that much of this research comes at a high cost. His own experiments involve patients reliving their trauma and being seriously upset by the process. And I just want to say this is the second time I've read the book. I read it about a year and a half ago. One of my children had gifted me the book and it sat on my shelf for a while. And then I read it and it took me several months to get through it. But this time I had to keep pushing through because I knew I had this presentation and this book group to prepare for. And it can be difficult to get through it. So there's a quote. A lot of the information I have on these slides is taken directly from the book. Sometimes I have it items in direct quotes. So he says, trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way mind and brain manage perceptions. And it was really, I guess, kind of astounding to me to realize that the PTSD diagnosis was accepted in 1980. And I realized that was over 40 years ago, but it seems like it's become such a part of our culture that I was surprised. I guess I was kind of surprised that it was only 40 years ago. And he also says the way medicine approaches human suffering has always been determined by the technology or technologies available at any given time. And then the triumph of pharmacology, the drug revolution that started out with so much promise, may in the end have done as much harm as good. One of the first stories he talks about is a veteran of the Vietnam War, I believe, Tom, and this was in 1978, and he realizes how little literature, medical literature there was available at the time about Tom's condition, which has led, I think, the author to decades of work and research. It's also interesting that we read in chapter 3 that the brain scans show a shift in activity from the left to the right side of the brain. That part is more, so the left side is more emotional and visual, whereas the left side of the brain recalls the facts about what has happened. The right side remembers how it felt. Most of the time, the two sides of the brain work together fairly smoothly. But when the left side of the brain fails to function during the memory of a trauma, this prevents the patient from viewing the action analytically in context as an experience that happened a long time ago. So that, I believe, is it for what I have for part 1, chapters 1 through 3. I'd like to open it up now to anyone's comments about if you have anything you would like to talk about in relation to these chapters. And if not, that's totally fine because there's plenty other. Yeah, go ahead.
I was a little surprised actually through the reading. It wasn't just necessarily 1 through 3, but he said it in several of the other places, was how ineffective it seemed the talking was. He almost made it sound like the drugs and physical things helped a lot more than just talking through it, which is surprising because when you think of therapy, you usually think of going in and sitting down and talking through it, but that didn't seem to be very effective, which was surprising to me.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think in particular with PTSD, it's that's one of the things he emphasizes throughout the book is how ineffective that was. And really, to some point, how ineffective drugs are. The other thing I was kind of astounded by was that Prozac was, I think it was I had it somewhere in my notes. When that became available, I thought, wait, Prozac's only been available for a relatively short period of time. It seems like, again, that seems like one of those things that's been around forever, but not so. I don't see anybody. Oh, Rebecca, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, did I raise my hand right? I don't know. It's
No, you did.
tired
It was
today.
just a light background and I wasn't noticing it.
Yeah, no. And I moved my studio, so it's like the sun rises on it. So I'm like, oh, celestial looking. So no, the whole concept of the idea that your brain is telling your body that something is happening to you right there in the moment, which isn't, but your body is reacting in that way. That's just so fascinating. And we've all experienced that where it's so real. You just literally feel physical emotions or feelings or stress or pain. It reminded me, I thought about this a lot when we read, remind me, Landon, I think it was Free Will. I think it was Sam Harris, where they talked about a brain beyond your brain. I think, was it Free Will, Landon?
It may have been, yeah, that you
Yeah, I
really
think
didn't
it was.
have a
So
lot of choice.
yeah, no, just that there is, and so when I first became aware of that kind of concept that, oh, I'm feeling these feelings, this trauma, this stress, it's because my brain thinks something is happening that isn't. And I tried to adopt this idea of outthinking my own brain, kind of just getting beyond it somehow and telling myself, you are not feeling this. This is not happening to you, so reading more about it in the book, just the techniques that they talked about. Cause I just kind of evolved on that concept, but didn't really have any tools to figure out how you do that. Even though you're telling yourself with your brain kind of outside of your brain that this is not real, you're still feeling it. It's very real to you at the moment. So the book was very helpful to me in that way, to just the strategies and the tools to basically trick your own brain into behaving again, right? And putting it back in perspective. So it was absolutely fascinating to me.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. All right, we'll go on to the next section. This is Your Brain on Trauma, which is chapters 4 through 6. The author sees his field. Okay, sorry, I don't know what just popped up there. The author sees his field as the connection between the body and the brain. The body is also his principal diagnostic tool in discovering the nature and extent of the patient's mental trauma. He has studied connections between the body and the brain and is particularly sensitive to any problem posed by a lack of connection. And this idea of connection he returns to again and again. Trauma patients often experience dissociation from those around them, their friends, families, and the rest of society, since no one else understands the nature of their experiences. The experiences which cause the trauma are also dissociated from the rest of their lives, continually revisited with a unique intensity. They also experience dissociation within themselves, meaning that they feel as if their bodies, physical experiences, and emotions do not belong to them. And then I, as you can see, highlighted this with bold type. Psychological healing, like physical healing, means restoring the links broken by trauma. And I think he talks about that idea a lot. Next slide on the same section. So if you remember, I think it's in chapter 4, yes, it starts with a story of a boy named Noam who was in elementary school and witnessed the attack on the World Trade Center in New York on 9/11. And he and his classmates and his teachers were able to run away and escape unharmed. And the next day, Noam drew a picture of what had happened, in which he included a trampoline at the bottom of the Twin Towers, his idea for saving everyone who had to jump out of the windows for any future attack. So his agency in running away and his optimism in planning for the future are in stark contrast to the paralysis experienced by victims of trauma. So a couple quotes here. Being traumatized means continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on, unchanged and immutable, as every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past. And the most important job of the brain is to ensure our survival even under the most miserable conditions. I really liked his discussion of how the brain is organized, especially these different levels of the brain and how it's built from the bottom up. So first we have that ancient animal brain, which is sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain. Then the limbic system, which can be referred to as the mammalian brain. And the reptilian and the mammalian brain make up that what we would call the emotional brain at the heart of the central nervous system. Its task is to look out for your welfare. Another part of the brain is the thalamus, which acts as the cook within the brain, and the amygdala, which acts as the brain smoke detector. These are terms that the author uses. And then on top of those brains, we have the rational brain, the neurocortex. And the frontal lobes, especially that medial prefrontal cortex, is he refers to as the watchtower. I really appreciated the idea that not all people respond to trauma exactly the same way. And I've known this idea of fight, flight, or freeze, but to see it with the brain scans is so interesting. Other terms for fight, flight, and freeze can be focused, frantic, and collapsed. So if you remember the story of Stan and UT's car accident, and they were in Minnesota, and they were in this horrific many multi-car pileup, and they responded differently. And after the car accident, they were having trouble just being able to get on with their lives. And they got in with one of the researchers that the author worked with, they had brain scans done. So if you remember Stan's brain scan, when they would have him go back and kind of relive that car accident, his brain scan just lit up and it shows his flashback in action. But Yudi's brain scan just was almost nothing was lit up. She was blanking out. So that is like the fight versus the freeze response. And I don't know about any of you, but I have certainly had times when people say, or I've even said to my children, unfortunately, well, why can't you just do this? So-and-so was able to respond in a certain way. Or why can't, you get past this? Well, we all respond differently. And this to me was just a really obvious way in which from brain imaging that shows how differently we can respond to that. And we don't have control over that. Our brains, our bodies are just going to do that. He also talks about polyvagal theory, especially related to social relationships and understanding trauma. And another quote from the book is, most of our energy is devoted to connecting with others. This idea of reciprocity, being able to feel safe with other people, is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. And the ANS, our autonomic nervous system, regulates 3 fundamental physiological states. The level of safety determines which one of these is activated at any particular time. So people with PTSD shut off terrifying sensations, but that also deadens their capacity to feel fully alive. And this idea of agency, of feeling of being in charge of your life. And that the mind needs to be re-educated to feel physical sensations. I think there's one more slide. Oh, no, that's it for this section. All right. Any thoughts or comments on this section here about the brain, about the different ways that people respond to trauma? Yes, Bruce.
Well, I'm just going to bring up my privileged white boy traumas related to the Mormon Church. I still occasionally have nightmares about having to go back on my mission. And that used to be very frequent. It is less frequent now. I mean, maybe every year or two, where before it was really frequent. Also, just, as I was reading this, I'm going like, okay, I wasn't sexually abused. I wasn't physically abused. But I was always taught that I was fundamentally broken because I was gay. And I have no friends from high school or college at BYU at all, 0. Because, I mean, how could you have friends when you were, in the closet hiding? And as I mentioned to some of the organizers of the book club, I spoke at my parents' funeral. I know nothing about them. I knew what restaurants they liked. I knew what they thought about our family business. They owned apartment buildings, and I ran it for the last 20 years of their lives. But knowing anything about it, because the culture that we grew up in, you couldn't feel or say anything that wasn't in the religious orthodoxy. Yeah, so as I was reading this, I'm going like, okay, I wasn't, I never went to war. I wasn't physically or sexually abused, but I have these things that I guess I view kind of as a form of PTSD, just because they've affected my life, for decades.
Thank you. And whether or not we have PTSD from a traumatic experience, we've still had a traumatic experience. And we may have some residual effects that can be similar to PTSD without realizing it. All right, Ren.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say I liked that you highlighted the aspect that not all people respond to trauma in exactly the same way. That's one thing as I've kind of gone through, and I appreciate what Bruce shared there, because I think a lot of us have experienced maybe similar things, just church related, and maybe more, and maybe other things. The other thing that I was going to say too is that not all people respond to trauma in exactly the same way, and also different things are traumatic for everybody, right? So I've tried to really, as I've done my own therapy and gone through my own things, one of the things that I have tried to be, and one of the things that I've come to understand about myself is when people share things with me, I need to be understanding of, I try not to make the judgment that, oh, why is that so, why is that traumatic? Why would that event have been traumatic for you? Where maybe it was for them, but so everybody's different and everybody responds to those things differently.
Ren, I really appreciate that comment. So thank you so much for sharing that. You're absolutely right. Not everyone's going to respond the same way. That little boy, Noam, in chapter 4, who was able to draw a picture of the trampoline after 9/11, and it seems like his brain was able to process through the trauma. There's other people who were directly in that space as well that had much different responses. So thank you. That's an excellent point. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. This is something that I got from my wife, who is a therapist, and she had described to me that trauma is just basically any event that exceeds someone's capacity to process in a healthy way. And so something that exceeds one person's capacity may not exceed someone else's capacity, but once that threshold has been reached and they aren't able to process that, that's when the fight or flight, the limbic system, all these traumatic responses that you've been talking about are triggered. And even though PTSD, according to official DSM criteria for diagnosis, is very specific in that it has to be, maybe a war event or a sexual event or something, that doesn't mean that someone might be experiencing an event that's not one of those specific criteria, but exceeds their ability to process. And then they are very traumatized and their reaction is the same or potentially the same as someone that's experiencing an event that is allowed as a PTSD diagnosis. And once you've gotten to that point, then the response is the same. And so the treatment is going to be probably similar, regardless of what the actual initiating event is. And so that just goes back to what we've been talking about, that it's different for different people, because we all come with different backgrounds on what and what we've been educated on and what we're able to process. And something that might be a minor event in your life, is a blessing because you have that capability and have learned the coping skills to process in a healthy way, but that's not true for everybody. And so I'm just kind of echoing what others have said.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as that's an excellent point. And I wrote down, that exceeds person's ability to process, because I want to remember that concept. That really resonated. Lori.
I'll make it super short, but I had long COVID and I thought several times that I was going to die. So I actually did get diagnosed with PTSD, and working with I had full body shakes and I couldn't go into public. And I'm very outgoing and I love being out with people, but I just turned into a different person, and I could see all of these things happen. And this really resonated with me. And then just a plug, I did do EMDR and it did work. And it also helped with church trauma that wasn't necessarily PTSD, I guess would be classified, but was pretty traumatic for me, and was able to help with that as well. So I just thought I would share that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. We will be talking about EMDR some more as we get through the slides. So thank you so much. I appreciate that, Bruce.
I just had one additional thought related to my original comments. I've always felt I had a certain level of, PTSD or effect from my mission. One, it didn't cure me from being gay, and it was 2 freaking years of, guilted if you slept in 5 minutes, or if you took an afternoon off, or if something was going wrong, it was your fault. And that prolonged nature of 2 years of that, being monitored and controlled and made to feel bad, it wasn't like, prisoner of war camp being tortured and stuff, that I guess that's kind of long-term too, but it was a very long-term process. And then also, if you're feeling bad about yourself because of religious beliefs, sometimes that goes on for decades for all of us and stuff. So that was just kind of my additional thought for that.
Thank you. I didn't serve a mission, which now post-Mormon I'm grateful for, but 2 of my children did. And another one was called, but then COVID hit and he just never served. We count that as a blessing now, but the more I read people's accounts of their mission, especially as they're deconstructing Mormonism, I'm thinking, how is this okay for anyone? The author in this book uses the term agency a number of times, and it always caught my attention, I think, because we talk about agency in the church, and you don't really hear that term a whole lot just out in society. But that sense of feeling safe in your own body and having control, whereas trauma victims feel unsafe in their own bodies and no sense of agency in their life. And so it's interesting with when you think of a mission and what's required there. Daniel, did you have a comment? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Daniel. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just listening to Bruce talk, it occurs to me that,
I can't hear you. Can anybody else?
Can you hear me?
No, we're not hearing you, Daniel.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to go on, and Daniel, please come back. All right, I'm going to go on to the next part, the minds of children, which is chapters.
Yeah, Daniel, we can hear you just barely, so there's something wrong with your volume, and we'll
Okay, thanks, Bruce. This was the hardest part, probably the hardest part for me, reading all these stories about children's experiences. A lot of the book is gut-wrenching and heartbreaking, but just to say, especially this part. The Minds of Children, 4 chapters, chapters 7 through 10. So chapter 7 begins again with the importance of the importance of connection, this time between parents, particularly primary caregivers and children. So the author emphasizes that the term trauma refers to anything which breaks this connection actively or passively through violence or coldness. He adds corroborative detail to his thesis that the body is more sensitive than the mind and is a more accurate repository of memories. The idea of we are profoundly social creatures, our lives consist of finding our place within the community of human beings. And then he talks about this dance of attunement between mothers and children, and this idea of mirror neurons, which give us the capacity for empathy. And a quote, with good enough caregivers, children learn that broken connections can be repaired. It is through the experience of being cared for by their parents that children learn to take care of themselves as they grow up. Children who do not form secure bonds with their parents develop coping strategies, pretending not to care for or not drawing attention to themselves by drawing attention to themselves by continual crying and screaming. The motif of connection and disconnection occurs in 2 principal ways: the connections between different forms of trauma in childhood and the connection between being an abused child and becoming a dysfunctional adult. The impact of trauma, and this is where he gets into some political pieces. The impact of trauma focuses on society as a whole, is also discussed. This is difficult to quantify in purely social terms, so the argument is based largely on economics. The US spends $84 billion per year on incarceration, and if the author is correct, a large number of these incarcerated have suffered from childhood trauma. Norway, which has more progressive methods of trauma diagnosis and treatment, incarcerates citizens at less than 1/10 of the rate that the US does, 71 per 100,000 people, as opposed to 781 per 100,000. This part of the book includes a more explicitly political agenda. He argues not only that trauma should be understood in terms of connections between the body and the brain, but that the US lags behind other countries in researching and understanding the nature of trauma. This has a devastating impact on trauma victims whose lives are wasted, but it also affects everyone in the country when those who could have contributed to society are compelled to be nothing but a burden. That is a summary from another source that I took. As I read it, I'm like, that does not sound very, very good. And if you'll remember this ACE study, or adverse childhood experiences, and where traumatic life experiences during childhood and adolescence are far more common than expected. I think it's a 10 question questionnaire, questions. And the higher you score on that ACE, the more likely there is to have chronic depression in childhood, as well as major health problems. One of the main presenting problems that they were looking at was obesity, which may be a marker for the real problem. And if you remember, they realized as they were treating obesity in this one study, that was just a mask or a marker for other problems, and that there was some real benefit to the person who was obese, that then when they were addressing the obesity, there were other issues that also came up. This idea of developmental trauma. In the case of troubled children with histories of abuse and neglect who show up in clinics, schools, hospitals, and police stations, the traumatic roots of their behavior are less obvious, particularly because they rarely talk about having been hit, abandoned, or molested, even when asked. Developmental trauma is also not yet a recognized diagnosis, and this quote, social support is a biological necessity, not an option, and this reality should be at the backbone of all prevention and treatment. We can assume that parents do the best they can, but all parents need help to nurture their kids. James Heckman has shown that quality early childhood programs that involve parents and promote basic skills in disadvantaged children more than pay for themselves in improved outcomes. Let's see, nope. Okay, that's the last slide for that section. Again, if anyone has comments to make, feel free to do that. I have some other notes that, oh, Ren, go ahead, and then I will talk after that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
you're totally fine.
Just one comment I had, and this may not be a real popular opinion, but I don't like it when people compare the United States to other countries, like especially like Norway. And the reason I say that is because social programs like this that could help, and I'm not saying that the US should not do this or even attempt, but when you try to compare a nation that has, 350 million people in it to a nation that has maybe 4 or 5 million people, those social programs are administered in much easier ways. It's a little bit easier to control. It's just a smaller country. And so it's hard when you say, well, you compare this to that type thing. And because the implication is that they have all the answers. Well, I don't know if they have all the answers. I guess it depends on what we're talking about. So that's one of I always take it with a grain of salt when they start comparing us, comparing our nation to another country, especially a much smaller one, where these types of social programs could be administered, could be helped. I think his point, though, is valid in that involvement of parents and good parenting skills are essential for child development.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you pointing that out. I think for me, the significance of those numbers is just, okay, so what does that mean for the United States? Where could we be doing a better job in those areas? And you're right to compare a nation with over 300 million to a nation with, I don't know what Norway's population is, but much smaller. Is that really a fair comparison? But on some level, maybe, I think there is some validity to looking at that. I was going to see if there was anything I wanted to talk about. Oh, Roy, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Roy. This is my first time on here. I live in Redmond.
Welcome. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm in Redmond, Washington. I just wanted to make a comment. These chapters were really moving for me. I'm a behavior analyst, and we have kind of a saying in our field that says, when you look at like all of the contexts and all of the learning histories and all of the things involved in people's behavior, that all behavior makes sense. And I think that's one of like the most compassionate things that we can kind of bring to the table. Just thinking about those people who are incarcerated or childhood trauma, just because you have some of those traumas doesn't mean that you will end up in prison. There's many different intersectionalities and different things that happen to different people and why they go where they go. But I also just think having that concept that all behavior makes sense helps us not to label people as crazy or bad or any of those things, and just to kind of try and put on a compassionate lens about there's lots of context and history to all of us that we don't understand when we're seeing a person just in one moment of their time.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Roy. I really appreciate that, Landon.
Yeah, I was really surprised kind of by the when they talked about parents and how much parents need help to nurture their kids. I think we're unique in the animal kingdom because maybe evolution over time has sorted out in the animal kingdom good parents from bad parents, because it doesn't seem like, sometimes you see bad parents in the animal kingdom, but for the most part, they raise their young without a lot of, they have absolutely no training or any way to get it. But it was amazing that as I looked at it, all the numbers that they were pointing out, if you did this, it was more likely to cause a problem. If a parent did this to a child, it would, especially some of the sexual things and stuff, how it was just thousands of times greater chance that they would have problems. And, so I look back at our evolution, I say, God, evolutionarily wise, we should be strong parents, but it really appears that humans aren't. We really need outside sources and outside structure. And maybe that's where the church really stepped in and helped a lot, I think, in raising kids. And now that you're out of the church, that can sometimes be a challenge. What do I do? What programs do I use? Where do I get help? So that was just something I was thinking about is, now that I'm out, my kids are grown, but it's still where do you get help with that in parenting skills? Because it's almost like you have to have a manual to do it.
Right. And I think that's where the idea, it takes a village, that idea of it takes a lot of people. I also thought, Bruce, I'll get you in just a second. I thought it was interesting that, the children are often unable to express or unwilling to express what has happened to them. But they are, if they talk about what happens, they may either be sent back to their caregiver who is perpetuating some of this abuse, or put in a foster care system, which has its own issues many times. So these children they're kind of in one of the worst situations when we talk about PTSD that happens to people at war or in a traumatic event like 9/11 or something. Those are often as adults when they're having those experiences. And they may have developed some ability for resilience through their lifetime and able to face those experiences in a different way, even if they do have PTSD. But children, they're just developing. And it really makes me wonder, when are we going to see some other and my brain is not working right now, but of this developmental trauma, or what some people call complex PTSD, and neither of which I believe is a diagnosis that's recognized, but the idea of this repeated traumas over and over and over again. Bruce.
I just had a comment on Landon's comment about, the animal kingdom seems to know how to raise kids. I had a Siamese cat growing up, and she lived to 19, but she had a litter of kittens, and she was the worst mom. She wouldn't feed her kittens, and I used to have to go find her and bring her back. And then we took her to the vet, and it turned out she was already pregnant again. And I'm just going like, okay, those kittens wouldn't have made it if I didn't help feed them and make her go feed them. And so the whole natural selection thing with humans, we live so long, and the negative effects of bad parenting. But I keep wondering, I'm listening to a podcast series about Mr. Rogers, and if you've seen the kind of documentary on him, you're going like, wouldn't it be nice if there was a non-religious based parenting and family interaction guide that would have healthy relationships and stuff? Because I know my parents took their cues from the church, and many of the things were quite good, but many of the things were extremely bad. So I don't know, just a couple.
Yeah. Thanks for those thoughts, Rebecca.
Yeah, I was kind of going to talk about the same topic. It made me realize that, when I was raising kids, definitely the church was helpful as far as community and other moms and resources and things like that. Then I thought about my own childhood, and I had a mother I've talked about before who was completely bedridden, so she was out of the picture. And then I had a father that spent every waking moment at church and in church activities. So, and I had never thought of myself as being raised alone or raising myself, because I had two parents. But, as an adult, I had some of the anxieties and the, introverted extrovert kind of situation that you come from, that you find in people that were raised that way. And I always thought, well, that wasn't me. It wasn't until I started thinking about it, I'm like, nope, I pretty much had absent parents in every way. And in that sense, the church involvement, I mean, I think a lot of you can relate to that, either yourselves or having been raised that way, that a lot of parents are absent in the church because it's so high demand. And that definitely impacts children. And some of them, depending on their circumstance and personality, can impact them for a lifetime, I think, like it did me. And I'm only just barely starting to realize that that's what happened. So interesting.
Thank you. Great comments. Lori.
I actually am talking about the same thing. I really felt the same way, like, especially when Landon was talking. I had this discussion with my brother, who is still in the church, and I wouldn't say hanging by a thread, hanging by a few threads. And we had this debate, and he was like, but how are you going to raise your kids? Like, you have nothing. And I was like, but don't I have values? Like, can't I have values? I probably am not going to encourage my kids to go out and sleep with everyone, because that is physically and emotionally dangerous for them. And we'll talk about those things. And when I was in the church, I never talked to my kids about that, because those were the rules. They had the rules. And I don't know, like, it's really hard. I definitely feel like the church helped when I was a younger mom, for sure, with that structure. But I also, just like you guys were saying, it was so incredibly damaging. And now, as my 21-year-old daughter is experimenting with drinking, which is developmentally appropriate, we're experimenting together, because I don't know and I don't even know what to tell her. And I don't know. I was just thinking about that from the church, and like, especially with my brother, just being, well, but you have to have the rules. But don't we have values? Aren't we inherently good? We are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's almost like the church becomes a plug and play kind of situation where you're like, great, here it is. I don't have to think about it because they've already done this for me. Yeah, exactly.
And even in my marriage, we never even talked about anything. We just went in because we were both Mormon. We knew what we were going to do. Never even talked about it. That could have been a serious deal killer.
Yeah, I find it fascinating now to look at those things that I really didn't spend any time looking at, because the church already told me what to think and what to do about them. And I was a very devout member, so I would just do those things. I find that it's very expansive, and I find I have a curious mind, and that it's fun. Daniel.
All right, am I mic'd now? Can you hear me?
Yes, sounds good.
Nice. This actually ties back into what I was thinking before, but also Bruce's comment when he was talking about, the trauma that he experienced, but also it ties into what we're talking about just now with childhood trauma, and how it seems to be there's something special about childhood trauma, especially when a parent inflicts that trauma on a child. And it's because we've evolved in such a way that as small children, we look to our parents unconditionally. We just look to them like they have all the answers. We've evolved to follow them point blank. I remember once my son was really small. He was probably, maybe 2 or 3 years old, but he was sitting on my lap doing something, and he bit me. And just joking around, I was like, I'll bite him back. And so I bit him back, and he started to cry. And what was the first thing he did? He turned to me for comfort. He buried himself in my neck for comfort because he was sad about it. And this book talked about that children, even when abused by their parents, given the choice, will run back to their parents. And because of that special relationship and that special place, parents inflicting trauma on their children is uniquely bad. And it occurs to me, going back to Bruce's comment, that maybe it's not the same as war or other things, but in the church, our parents inflicted a lot of trauma on us because they sold us these lies and this way of being that wasn't correct and wasn't good for a lot of us. And so that special type of trauma, I think, is, like I said, it's unique. It's a parents inflicting this trauma upon children. And so, like I said, while it's not the same as some other ones, it's uniquely bad.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I did the same, what you just said, Daniel, where, parents inflict the church as maybe a traumatic thing on their children. Well, I did the same thing to my children. I've only been out of the church for going on 7 years. And my children are now all adults. And what I'm grateful for is the relationship I have with them now. I appreciate the phrase good enough parents, and the author uses that phrase because I know I wasn't perfect, and I know I made mistakes. I don't think any parents cannot make mistakes. It's just what happens. But we've all maybe in some ways done this to our children in some ways. But again, good enough parents are able, like you with your son, you were able to comfort your son when he turned to you for, that when you were just joking around with him, but that biting incident, that's what I hope I'm doing now with my children in a larger sense, like as we all deconstruct the church together. Sean.
This this conversation is really tugging on some emotional strings, I have to admit. I just wanted to mention real quick, when I was young, my family was pretty dysfunctional, and there were 8 of us children, and we kind of pulled together and tried to support each other as best as possible. And for a long time, I prided myself on how crazy our family was, and yet how well-rounded I ended up being. Well, decades later, I'm learning about life and dealing with my own trauma and whatnot. I take this ACE study, and on a scale from 1 to 10, I actually scored an 8. And that kind of surprised me. I thought, it surprised me in one way, but in another way it didn't, because there's so much emotional baggage just tied up in my childhood experiences. And but I have to say, for a long time, the church was the only structure that I had. It was the only thing that I could really rely on to help me get through some of these really trying, difficult times. And now that I'm going through this, I'm one of those still members who's kind of hanging by a thread, not in terms of my belief, but in terms of my activity. And the whole world is just kind of unraveling. But this conversation is just really, it's helping me get a better perspective on just what I experienced as a child. And now I'm looking at my own children and seeing how they struggle as young parents, and thinking, oh man, they really don't know what they're doing either. We look to our parents and think that they have all the answers, but they don't. They really don't. Anyway, I just wanted to mention a few of those things that have kind of popped in my mind, and I'm not sure what to make of it all, but it's really causing me to think.
Well, thank you, Sean, for sharing that. I would say it's a journey. That's, at first I categorized what I was experiencing with the church as a faith crisis, because that's what it felt like, a crisis. And then as I've gotten further along, I just call it a journey. It's part of the life journey that I never expected to be on. Also, Sean, you referenced the ACE study, and having taken that, anyone can Google the ACE questionnaire and you can take that. You can find that. Bruce.
I just had a concept that I know I've seen it on Reddit and experienced in my whole life, is being a church orphan. My father was bishop as I grew up for 12 years total. 7 years the first time, then a couple 3-year break, and then 5 years the next time. And I can remember trying to talk to him, and I would have to make an appointment with his church executive secretary if I wanted to even find him. And that's a concept, that I've seen where, especially the fathers are so gone all the time with their church responsibility. So it's a concept I think that's kind of there in the Mormon context.
Yeah, thank you. I experienced the same type of thing when I was growing up. My father was called into the bishopric. I was probably 2 or 3, and he spent the next, I don't know, 30 years in leadership positions, mostly bishopric, bishop, stake president, all of that. So I totally get not having a dad in the home, but it was always framed in the way of, well, your family must be getting blessings from your dad being in those positions. I don't know that how I would even quantify what blessings were those. Nelson.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when we first had this book on the list, I was thought, oh, not some more of this psychobabble BS that we're going to have to deal with. This book changed my mind, I will tell you. And I heard about this ACE study, this ACE stuff a couple of years ago. And again, it didn't really make much of an impression on me, because I think partially because of the person that was presenting it wasn't really making it clear as to what it was about. And this author, I think, put a lot of this together. I spent 10 years working in the criminal justice system, prosecuted a lot of domestic violence cases. So I dealt a lot, women dealing with trauma. For several years, I was involved with a woman that had a lot of foster kids that she fostered. And, my son, I call him my son, I have no legal obligation or rights to him. I have nothing, but he was adopted by this woman when he was about 3 years old, about when I started having a relationship with her. So I still we've split up. I still consider him my son. We do things together all the time as a parent would. But I think of some of the stuff with him. He went to her house as a foster child at 18 years old, or 18 months old. His leg was broken in 5 places by his mother. And well, she says it wasn't her, it was the boyfriend, but whoever it was. His leg was broken in 5 places. And she describes when he first showed up, when the first 2 months, he was at her house, he would sit in the high chair and just stare out into space. There was nothing they could do to him, do for him, to comfort him. They would try to hold him and he would kind of push away, just lay there, no emotion whatsoever for months and months at a time. By the time I got involved with him, he was appeared to be a much more happy kid. But now at 17, I think we see some of those effects coming back. 15, 16, 17-year-old. I know there was a comment made towards the end of the book by the author about wanting people to be dependent, but having to be interdependent as well, because you can't do both. I mean, you really got to have people, but you got to be able, and this kid, he is wants to be one of the most independent people. He knows everything. And this is partly, I think, just being a 17-year-old too, but he thinks he knows everything. He knows the way to accomplish everything. You can't tell him anything. But then on the other hand, he is one of the most needy 17-year-olds I've ever met in my life as well. He can't figure out how to keep his bank account together, and he makes money doing YouTube and makes some pretty good money. He had a blowout on his tire the other day and couldn't figure out how to even hardly get off the road to address that. But I go back to it and I look at it and I think, the ACE events that he had in his life in the first 18 months are probably more than I could ever come up with at all. And I think, and then watching other foster kids that were in her house as well. And you just kind of like, okay, but this is over. That's over with. We've put you in a better environment. But then also, as he was talking about, and I'm kind of rambling a little now, but he was talking a little bit about too, just the kids that are in foster care. You know, there's a permanency word. Well, I heard that word permanency so many times. And so I think one of the biggest downfalls we've got in our behavioral health system in this country, and maybe across the world as well, is that, and I don't want to offend anybody, behavioral health professionals that might be on our call with us, but I think they're lacking in their training and their understanding, because you see so many people that just, it's, you know, as Landon said, the talking doesn't work. It doesn't help. It needs so much more. And, you know, it's interesting too. I was talking to my kid's mom one evening, and I was told, you know, I started mentioning I was reading this book, and she goes, I said, I'm reading a book that talks a lot about that stuff. And she goes, yeah, somebody referred me to a book too called The Body Keeps the Score. And I'm like, that's the book I'm talking about. So it's very interesting. So, you know, and one of the things too, and then I'll let everybody else go on, but you know, he was talking about the revisions to the DSM 4 or 5, whichever version it was at that time, where they had things, you know, some of the professionals wanted to add into it, but the American Psychiatric Association, whatever, no, we got to get depressed. We're not worried about that. There's not a diagnosis for it, so you can't treat it. I think that's one of our big problems. And again, like I said, when we started this book, I thought it was just more of that psycho babble BS that people talk about, you know, that I would see people talking about during my sentencing hearings and dealing with people with women in domestic violence. Why do they stay? This book actually changed my mind on that, and put a lot of things into perspective. If we could just figure out how to use that to come up with more answers would be helpful. But
yeah, Nelson, I appreciate what you've shared there. I think one thing that was really interesting that you shared is like, well, we put you, meaning this child, you know, into a better situation, foster care, whatever. Act better, right? We've given you a better situation, so now everything's fine. You should be acting better, but that doesn't take into account all the years and the effects of that, and what needs to happen, especially for a developing child, a developing mind and body. And I think that's why this section just was so hard for me to get through, just reading those stories of what children were experiencing. Pat. Oh, you need to unmute, Pat. You're still muted. Oh, there you go. Okay, go for it.
So when I was in the church, I thought the church helped too. Until when you go to church, you sit quietly with your family for an hour, and everybody is split up. The husbands from the wives, the children from their parents, the siblings from each other. We were never taught as a group. We were just all separated to learn the doctrine of the church. There's no learning our behavior was always an example. My daughter would say, well, that wasn't a very good example. And then I realized she wasn't learning how to behave herself and who she was. She was just acting so that she was a good example to her friends at school. There was no introspection. There was no teaching on how to deal with these traumas. You go to the interviews and you learn how to lie so you don't get in trouble. The lucky ones who figure that out. You're groomed to do anything for authority. And you think it's helpful, but at the end, we all get out and look at the struggle. I got out I was 62 when I got out, and I had to learn how to think and what I really liked and what I didn't like. And it was so traumatic to realize that my judgment had been off for all that time. And then I had raised this daughter who believed all that stuff. But aside from that, this book is just so incredible to me. And when I hear kids are resilient, they're not resilient because look how messed up we are as adults. Good at stuffing, at hiding, at disassociating. That's what they're good at, because for the most part, No one has taught these kids how to deal with what they're going through. And just as an example, my dad grew up dirt poor. There was a time when he was born in 1928, so it's way back in the day. But there was a time in his childhood when he remembers walking up the road, their family, trying to find weeds they could eat. That's how poor they were. My grandfather was one of these people with a, his fuse. So he killed a horse once with a 2x4 because it made him mad. So this is what my dad grew up with. And he joins the service where he learned how to discipline his kids. So he did better than his dad. We had a roof over our heads, we had food, we had clothing. He was absolutely absent emotionally from us at all. So the sad thing to me is, okay, so we grow up, we're totally messed up. But how do we fix this? Most people don't know about what this guy is teaching, how our brain works, and what we need to untether ourselves from this horrible trauma. So to me, I felt really good reading it, but it's also very depressing. And the fact that people don't want to, in the book, he was saying somebody backed off because then they realized he had to blame his father for something. And these people don't want this in here. And I'm sure who's doing the most molesting and the most abusing and the most raping? It's mostly men. And those men, I am married to a wonderful man, and my late husband was a wonderful man. So I don't mean to be broad brushing men, but some of these people in power want to protect themselves, and they know what they were doing in government, in the church, and so they push this off. So where do we learn? How can we change this to teach humanity what they do, how it affects the next generation, and how our brains work, and how what happened to me at 2 years old can still affect me as an adult because it's unresolved. It's just confusing. It's enlightening and helps me understand, but it makes me think we're screwed. That's where I end up.
Well, Pat, I understand what you're saying, and thank you for sharing that. Hopefully, as we get to the fifth section and talk about more of the modalities for healing, maybe we'll see some hope there, right? Let's go on. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. We had a lot of comments on that section. Appreciate that. Part 4, the imprint of trauma. This is chapters 11 and 12. This section of the book has a more historical focus, describing both the history of psychiatry and the historical events which gave rise to many traumas, particularly the 2 world wars. Once again, the motif of connection appears as the author emphasizes how little the talking cure has altered since it was developed by Freud in the 1890s, and how essentially similar civilian trauma is to the shell shock suffered by soldiers in the First World War. The talking cure may require a healthy or a particularly acute intellect or great compassion on the part of the therapist, while finding precisely the right combination of drugs is a matter of diagnostic ability. The author's preferred method of reconnecting patients with their own bodies, however, is not centered on the abilities of the doctor, but on the action taken by the patient. This means that one of the principal qualities required from the psychiatrist is humility. And a quote, "Under ordinary conditions, these 2 memory systems, the rational and emotional," remember when we talked about the brain and the different layers of the brain, and these 2 memory systems collaborate to produce an integrated response. But high arousal not only changes the balance between them, but also disconnects other brain areas necessary for the proper storage and integration of incoming information. As a result, the imprints of traumatic experiences are organized not as coherent logical narratives, but in fragmented sensory and emotional traces, images, sounds, and physical sensations. Okay, that is that for short, just one slide there. Wanted to see if there were Anything else? I made some notes on these chapters, and a couple things I wrote down. Traumatized people simultaneously remember too little and too much. Traumatic memories can be precipitated by specific triggers, and traumatic memory is not condensed. I think this is the chapter where he talks about people who have experienced traumatic events and then are in a court to be a witness for something, and how often their accounts of that experience are fragmented, like we have talked about, so that they sometimes appear as not reliable witnesses. And also the understanding that those pieces of that traumatic event can often come back in phases and they'll be disorganized. So it's not that you're telling as if a timeline, be able to tell which event happened and then the next event and then the next event. So to me, this was another important part of understanding how the brain works, and especially in cases of trauma, and remembering that trauma and being able to recount what happened. And also this idea that culture shapes the expression of traumatic stress. And in the First World War, as soldiers came back and they had what we would now call PTSD, it was described as shell shock, and how, it's interesting, the comment was already made, that the author says that we can't treat something we don't have a name for, that we don't have a diagnostic name for. Any other thoughts or comments about this section? All right, Bruce.
Well, just that last statement that you were saying, you have to have a vocabulary for it.
Right.
I think that's basically one of the deficits I experience with the church is I don't have a vocabulary for healthy family, healthy concepts, healthy sexuality, healthy interpersonal relationships and stuff. I'm lacking in a lot of that because that's, the world I grew up in didn't have that. It was obedience, the rules, like Rebecca was saying, the rule follower father. I was a pretty good rule follower. And yeah, just having a name. And as I mentioned in the chat, the book club reading lists over the last, now we're in our third year, has given me, some vocabulary, insight into how the world actually works, how I work, what's my place in the world. And as I've mentioned before, I'm 65. I'm probably in the last quarter of my life, where, how do I live the last part of my life where I'm happy with it, where I'm a good contributing part of my community and stuff. So yeah, that vocabulary I'm lacking in, and that's in part what the book club gives me.
Oh, thank you. I really like the way you phrased that, to have a vocabulary for we don't know what we don't know, is I think what you're saying too. And once we have those words and those concepts that we can frame our experience with, it can really help us to express what we went through, or whether it's in the church or otherwise, right? Excellent. Something happened with my view here. Does someone have their hand raised? I'm not seeing anybody else.
Nope, we don't have any hands raised.
Which is totally fine, because we're going to get into what I think is the best part of the book, where it brings everything together. Part 5, the paths to recovery. And in each of the chapters here, and we're going to break these up 2 chapters at a time, but chapters 13 through 20 the author goes through explanations of different modalities, different things he's worked with, how he kind of came upon these different ways of working with patients, which I think is one of the highlights for me of the book. And I think, like what Pat was saying, where do we get the hope? We're all messed up basically, so where's the hope? I think there is a lot of hope, and I also think it starts with each one of us who can come to an understanding of where we are. And I think of how I lived my life for 50 some years as a member of the church, for example. There's other examples, but that's common to most of us here. And where I am now, and there's still a lot of discovery, things that I'm learning, which to me is exciting and also I think very hopeful. All right, so chapter 13 through 14. Chapter 13 starts with another shift in focus from the historical and explanatory to the personal and instructive. He addresses the trauma sufferer directly and tells them there are various ways of learning how to cope, and he continues to address the therapist. This approach explains his critical attitude to what he calls top-down therapies, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, in which the therapist defines dysfunctional behavior and trains the patient to avoid it. Which is unlike, well, contrasted to, I guess would have been a better way to phrase that, to massage and yoga, which help patients to feel more at home in their bodies. CBT concentrates on the brain, mastering the body, meaning that it is a top-down strategy within the patient as well as between patient and therapist. Just as the patient must be at the center of their own recovery, so the body must be centered within this recovery. A treatment in which the patient has intellectually accepted that the trauma is over, but signs of stress remain in the body will not have been successful. And I think this too is where, I think on the previous slide, the author mentions the psychiatrist needs to be humble and needs to have some humility there in really letting the patient working with the patient. Oh, wow, that was the end of that. Let me go back. Parts 13 and 14. There's a quote that I made in my notes from chapter 13, that trauma robs you of the feeling that you are in charge of yourself. So again, that idea of agency. So robs you of the feeling you're in charge of yourself, of what I will call self-leadership. And that's the author there. And then he says also, body awareness puts us in touch with our inner world, the landscape of our organism. Simply noticing our annoyance, nervousness, or anxiety immediately helps us shift our perspective and opens up new options other than our autonomic habitual reactions. Mindfulness puts us in touch with the transitory nature of our feelings and perceptions. When we pay focused attention to our bodily sensations, we can recognize the ebb and flow of our emotions, and with that, increase our control over them. Also, he makes the statement that there's no one treatment of choice for trauma. Also in chapter 13, he talks about communal rhythms and synchrony. He references the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa as they ended apartheid and were trying to move beyond that. And an account of some meetings that happened, one meeting in particular, I think he references in the book, of that Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and this work, or commission, and this work was to try and heal all those, that period of apartheid and what that had done to South Africa. And as the emotions and words were heated in that meeting, at some point someone started, I believe they started singing, and then more people started singing. And as they were singing, this communal rhythm, this attunement happened. Learning to attune we get to experience that feeling of connection. Also, where he talks about improvisation exercises, and he also does say CBT cannot be done well with PTSD patients, which again, the kind of talking therapy, although I have known people who have done well with CBT, a close family member in particular, but again, not necessarily a PTSD related. So it's not that CBT is not a good therapy to use. It's just may not be the best for people with PTSD. I'm going to stop sharing this just for a minute. And I'm going to share something else. This can just go up. How did I do that before? Sorry, guys. Is this? How do I get rid of this bar? Oh my gosh.
Go
Okay.
into presentation mode again.
Go to presentation mode?
Yeah.
Okay. This bar, I know before it went up.
Are you trying to share the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay.
And I can't get to it because this bar is covering that tab.
Stop sharing.
Okay.
And share again and pick the window.
Okay. I gotcha. Sorry about that, guys. I do want to show you the spreadsheet that we put together. Might take me just a second to make sure I'm clicking the right things here. Okay. Okay. Now I got it. All right. So I put this spreadsheet together, and we're going to post this on our Facebook page. But on this first sheet here, I went through and as I was reading the book this time, I highlighted the different modalities, the different therapeutic techniques, or anything that was beneficial, whether or not it was in this last section. And then I have a note from the book about why that's beneficial and what it does to help us. And then the next sheet is a list of a few resources that I have either used myself or that I'm aware of that could be helpful in these different, for different healing aspects. And so my hope is that as we post this, it's a Google Sheet, so anyone will be able to add to it if you have something else to add here. But all of these things listed a lot of them are talked about in chapters 13 through 20, this last section of the book, but also throughout the book. And there's, I think, 30 something things listed. Well, no, not quite 30, 23. Which I found so fascinating because a lot of these are not quote unquote therapeutic, that I've recognized as, oh, that's therapeutic, that a doctor or psychiatrist would prescribe, right? Some of them are, and some are being used more. Someone mentioned EMDR, sorry, I said that wrong, and we'll talk about that. I guess I can go back and forth. I don't know if I can go back and forth between these two, but I think this was really helpful for me to see how many different things are available. And again, as the author says, there's no one treatment of choice. And it's usually a combination of things that are going to help for us. And this is sorted in alphabetical order now. So on this page. So there's things that, like I was talking about with the communal rhythms, that can be the basketball team, chanting, drumming, choral singing, group singing, group dancing, a lot of those things have a similar effect, that rhythmically attuned movements, which I find really interesting. All right, well, I'm going to go back over to the slideshow. We'll come back to this later, most likely, but here we go. Oh, no, we're too far.
Stop. Yeah, and then go into presentation mode.
Yep. Thanks, Bruce, for keeping me on track there. Sorry about that. All right, so I think what I'll do is just go through another slide or two here, and then we'll take some comments about the paths to recovery. So in chapters 15 through 16, the two specific therapies that are explored are EMDR, which is a recent innovation, and yoga, which is an ancient practice. The author says that his responsibility as a doctor is to do what works for the patient, regardless of understanding how it works. He points out that other more traditional or conventionally scientific therapies are not necessarily any better understood. And I believe in some cases we could say that about the drugs, that we know that a lot of these medications are effective, but we can't always say why they're effective. So kind of following that idea, a general idea of the principle on which effective therapies are based, relaxing the body and making the patient feel physically comfortable has a beneficial effect on the mind. The trauma sufferer will always have the memory as the victim of a physical wound bears a scar, but they will be able to go about their daily lives with a calmness which cannot be simulated and which is a sure sign that the therapeutic process has worked. All right, let's take some comments. If anyone has any comments from chapters 13 through 16. I'll just say about EDMR from the book, focuses not only on regulating the intense memories activated by trauma, but also on restoring a sense of agency, engagement, and commitment through ownership of body and mind. It loosens up something in the mind or brain that gives people rapid access to loosely associated memories and images from their past, and helps the person put the traumatic experience into a larger context or perspective. All right, Rebecca.
So I would like to bear my testimony of communal singing. No, this is interesting. I know a lot of people, when they're stressed or sad or something, they might put on a favorite song, they might dance around the house. And that's a really good way to kind of, on a very superficial level, kind of get yourself out of it. But there's a group called Choir. You guys all need to look them up if you have not heard of them. They've been around for a long time. They put on these giant sing-along concerts all over the world, attended by hundreds of people in giant auditoriums and concert halls. And they sing together. It's like karaoke. They put words up on the screen. I came across one of them on YouTube. They were singing Bee Gees songs, and the joy on hundreds of people's faces as they're looking out, they're singing, they're smiling at their neighbor. It's just incredible. You've never experienced that in a church setting. So Choir came to Salt Lake just a few weeks ago, and a couple of us from the book club went. It was a smaller group, maybe like 100 people. But I'm not kidding. We all stood there. It was ABBA day, right? So we sang Mamma Mia. We sang everything. We're moving. We're singing. You can sing as loud as you want. There's no wrong answer. They taught us different parts. And I'm telling you, it was wonderfully cathartic. It was completely healing. There's just something about human beings getting together, doing something. We all knew the songs, we grew up with them, and it was just amazing. I mean, I still feel like I'm kind of glowing and have a positive effect from the experience. So anyway, that's my testimony of communal singing. And look up Choir. It makes you feel good even just to see hundreds of people doing the same thing together. It's just amazing.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I could feel that energy there. Okay, Roy.
Hi. So I just wanted to point out, I appreciate how he talked about how there's not one way to do this and there's multiple ways to do this. And I'm just thinking about us as a community, that in our culture, we have a lot of talk of one way, or certain things you could explore were a very small amount of things within that one way. And so just having lots of self-compassion for yourself as you start to try some of these things, and recognizing that they may feel uncomfortable the first time you try them, maybe feel weird. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, but just kind of having an open mind, and what we call in my field of work, like discovery skills, that I would say a lot of adults, not even necessarily in our culture, just as you get to be an adult, you kind of start to restrict yourself from your learning history of what you like and don't like. And so just keeping what I call like just a curious and open mind as you step into these. And also I had another tool, but I'll just add it to the Google Doc. It's called Focusing, the Power of Focusing. Kind of a newer tool that helps you just kind of honor what's in your body, and just kind of noticing, not needing to fix any of it, but just being aware of it.
Yeah, Roy, thank you for mentioning that. One of the oh my gosh, resources that I put on the second sheet of that spreadsheet is Insight Timer. Insight Timer is an app. It has tons of free content, but there is a paid portion as well. Anyway, that's one thing I learned on there. I've been using it. It's stress, mindfulness, sleep. They have a lot of live classes for yoga and other things. It's a wonderful resource. But one thing that stood out to me as I'm going through this mindfulness course is just what you said, that if we have a sensation or a thought that we don't like, we don't want to feel, and just recognize and accept, well, it's already here. I'm already feeling that, or I'm already thinking that, and just notice it non-judgmentally. I love that. Thank you. Bruce.
Yeah, I listened to the book while I was walking, and the part when it talked about, group singing, the vision that came to my head was the African American gospel choirs, and I juxtaposed the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, sitting up there, uniform, stiff, making great sound, and what I've seen of Black church choirs, there's body movement, there's singing. And then I also thought, okay, the Black experience in the US is, PTSD causing constantly. And it seems that the Black community, through the Black churches and this culture of singing and body movement and stuff, is probably a way to kind of self-heal from the world outside. And what Rebecca was talking about, I'm going like, oh, okay. And then the basic thought that came to me is, sometimes we don't understand the trauma that we have, but what if a family took all of these, I guess, modalities and just integrated them into the normal family life, singing together, yoga. Another thing that I find in some of my health research is meals together, eating together at home. Mindfulness. I know I pay for Sam Harris's podcasts and stuff, and he has a meditation and mindfulness app, and I haven't ever messed around with it, but I have the subscription. I have for several years now. But what would it be like if a family talked about mindfulness, if practiced yoga, if was encouraged to say, okay, here's the therapeutic concepts, here's somebody we know that's having this trauma, this is what's going on, and a person's going like, oh, okay, so this is a place for me to look for healing. It's quite the different experience than my Mormon upbringing. And so just integrating, it's like eating healthy food that you don't know why you're eating it, but a good variety of healthy food ends up making you healthy. And all these therapeutic modalities, if we integrate them in just to our daily lives without specific trauma in mind, it might just lead to a healthier experience for all of us.
I really like that thought. There's a lot of great ideas for healing modalities or healing techniques that the author uses in the book. There's going to be others that I hope you share and put on that spreadsheet as well. Add different resources like Bruce mentioned, the Sam Harris podcast. I mentioned Insight Timer and different ones. So thank you, Bruce. Ren.
Yeah, I just wanted to also attest to EMDR. I was fortunate to find a therapist a few years ago that helped me he was, I guess, taught to use EMDR, I think, appropriately. And I was fortunate in that respect. And so I benefited greatly from EMDR. I will say the first time I did it, it was weird. And it was probably one of the most strange things I had ever done. But I can't even begin to tell you how much it did help. So it's just kind of a way to reprocess and reframe some traumatic events in my life. The other thing that I was going to just mention, and I know it's kind of, I know through the book he talks about a little bit about talk therapy and just just people meeting with counselors and things like that. For me personally, my experience has been that talk therapy has been extremely helpful, and it's been one of the most therapeutic things I've done, especially when I stepped away from the church because it was so isolating. I ended up losing I lost my marriage because of it, and my 20-year marriage. And so it was an extremely isolating event. And so to find a therapist that was good at faith transitions and to use talk therapy for that purpose in my life was extremely helpful. And it was helpful for a time. And I actually still see that therapist just because it is so recent. I've only stepped away, it's only been a year and a half officially, but the last couple of years since COVID. So I would just say, I think what's important that he points out here, and I think it's already been said, that a combination of these modalities and a combination of these treatments, also finding a therapist. I have found that finding a therapist that is aware of some of these treatments and can, has the objectivity and also the educational background to understand how some of these things affect people, can be a difficult journey. And I think finding that is also part of the journey. At least it has been for me. And so I've used, I've had different therapists for different purposes and different things. And so I feel fortunate in that way that I've been able to find those resources because they are out there. And I think it's one thing that I think is a benefit of COVID. And I wished I had known about this book years ago. I forget when it was written, but I wished I had read it years ago because it's been extremely helpful to understand, these paths to recovery and what's available out there. But I will say COVID has presented some amazing opportunities where people, I think, are just more aware of how important our mental health really is, not only from being an adult, and it's okay to be working through things as an adult. And I think our society is slowly kind of coming around to that fact that I think mentally we were unhealthy for a really long time.
Ren, thanks for sharing that. Especially thank you for validating talk therapy. I definitely think there's a place for all the therapies that are in this book. I think the author in particular has found that in his experience working with PTSD patients, that talk therapy is not the most effective, but that is not to say it's not going to be effective for other situations or even for someone with PTSD. I think just maybe for the first time being able to tell your story to somebody and being heard in a safe place can be extremely therapeutic. Lori.
I just wanted to echo exactly what you were saying. So I've done the EMDR. I was the one that did that for health reasons primarily, but it also addressed some trauma that I've had in the past that I wouldn't necessarily call PTSD. But like having groups like this that know the journey that I've been through, that understand the culture, that understand where I came from and where I'm going. Because I'll talk to my non-LDS that have never been friends or never been members of
Mormon.
the church. Yeah, thank you. And they will say, oh, I would have never done that. And I was like, you can't say that. You weren't in it. Like they don't understand. And my friends that are members don't understand. And so I think having like the like-minded and being able to talk about that and being validated that that's my experience too. And you're not crazy is really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Another therapy that the author talks about in chapter 16 is emotional freedom technique that's also called EFT or tapping. I've used tapping a lot, and there's an app that I have on the spreadsheet that was really, really helpful. It's tapping a series of acupuncture points on various parts of the body, and as you say, generally, as you say different statements about what you're experiencing. So that is I have found extremely helpful. He also talks about heart rate variability, or HRV, which is a good measure of how well the autonomic nervous system is working. And I found this similar to how I was fascinated by the different parts of the brain. I'm fascinated by why heart rate variability works. Some of you may have Fitbits or smart, like your Apple Watch or something that gives you a reading of your HRV and may wonder, what does that really mean? The sympathetic nervous system uses chemicals like adrenaline to fuel the body and brain to take action. And the parasympathetic nervous system uses acetylcholine to help regulate basic body functions like digestion, wound healing, sleep, and dream cycle. This is all in chapter 16. When we're at our best, these two systems work closely together to keep us in an optimal state of engagement with our environment and with ourselves. So HRV measures the relative balance between these two systems, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. When we inhale, we stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which results in an increase in heart rate. And when we exhale, we stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which decreases how fast the heart beats. In healthy people, inhalations and exhalations produce steady rhythmical fluctuations in in heart rate. Good HRV is a measure of basic well-being. And poor HRV, which is a lack of that fluctuation in the heart rate in response to breathing, has negative effects on thinking and feeling, and also how the body responds to stress. So this is called coherence. So lack of coherence between breathing and heart rate makes people vulnerable to a variety of physical illnesses, such as heart disease and cancer, and mental health issues, depression, PTSD. And he talks about how yoga can help the heart rate variability in helping traumatized people learn how to comfortably inhabit their bodies. Because if you aren't aware of what your body needs, you can't take care of it. So I've also been aware of HRV for a while because I have a Fitbit, and it tracks that at night particularly. And it's interesting. I've also read about it because I'm like, what does that number mean anyway? So I've looked up information about it. Your one-time HRV rate is not what your HRV is all the time. It fluctuates throughout the day and at different times. And also as we age, it trends lower. So that's a normal response as well. And then this, so the author says that the two most important phrases in therapy are notice that and what happens next. And those, I believe, are used in EMDR, and can also be part of yoga and other things as well. All right, I don't see any comments, so let's go on to, we'll do the last, I think 2 slides. I think our time is, we're right, hitting up against 1 o'clock, so we're nearly done here. Thanks for hanging in. There's been some great comments. Okay, so chapter 17 and 18 focus on mental techniques that patients can employ to take charge of their own destinies. These methods are based around agency, there's that word again, and creativity. And I think agency, it's so interesting because my brain just goes to what I was taught in church about agency. It's basically choosing what God wants you to choose, rather than this true sense of agency, of being in charge of your own life. People experience multiple identities, can assume leadership over these separate selves, and decide which ones they value and which are destructive. So this is the internal family therapy, internal family systems therapy that he talks about. This does not mean that they become completely consistent, which is impossible except for exceptionally well-balanced people. But it does mean they exercise choice over the range of emotions they exhibit. Creativity and agency naturally grow together. No one is more of a free agent than the author of a play, who can create any characters and make them behave as the author wishes. People who seem to have been robbed of agency to the extent that they cannot even imagine what a happy childhood would have been like, can recreate themselves and their situations through a guided rescripting of their lives. This demonstrates to them that they do have ideas and ideals where they thought there was nothing but a void. There remains a strong physical and spatial element in the therapy. There's an element of physical theater in the technique that cannot be replaced by writing or talking. And then the last 2 chapters, and this is the last slide. In the final chapters of the book, the author juxtaposes cutting-edge science with one of the most ancient therapeutic techniques. So neuro-feedback is a promising area which has barely been used in the treatment of trauma, and drama has been providing purpose, agency, therapy, and catharsis for thousands of years. The author wants to explore every possible avenue to tackle the hidden epidemic, from ancient Greek drama to the latest neuroscience. Some patients may decide that they prefer a Freudian talking cure, as we've already talked about, and this will be their decision with a wide range of other options available to them. So I will stop sharing now so I can go to my spreadsheet. But if anyone has any comments, feel free to discuss.
Karin has a comment.
All right, go
Okay,
ahead.
I'm going to be very honest with you. I did not read the book. I intend to read the book. My daughter mentioned she had read it, but I must have missed something, because what does EMDR mean? What does it stand for?
That is in there something. It has to do with eye movement.
Oh,
eye movement. Yeah, I don't. So eye movement, something response, I think.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but I have done the tapping.
Yeah, the EMDR is a more recent therapy, and more therapists are being trained in it. So good question there. So again, here's our spreadsheet that we'll post on Facebook. Please add to it, because I think, like Bruce was mentioning, why not on a regular basis have various things that work, or whether or not we know how they work or why they work in our lives, and just create a balanced, healthy response to living in a world that's challenging anyway, despite our own very personal experiences that we've had trying to grapple with this life. So again, on the first page, I just have listed a lot of the different techniques or modalities that the author references in his book. I may have missed a few, but I think I got the majority of them, some of which we haven't even talked about. And then the second page, this is where I hope that we can build out some more resources. So a few of them I have mentioned. If you're the very one at the top, and these are in no particular order, it's just as I was going through. So if you're interested in working more or on heart rate variability, I would recommend HeartMath. It's a company that sells a little sensing device that you clip on your ear, and then you do 5 to 10 minutes of breathing, and it will record your HRV. It is pricey. That is pricey. So, I mean, there's other ways. The author talks about how yoga can help with that. And I think meditation in general, breathing exercises in general can also help. And then the app I mentioned for tapping, or the EFT, emotional freedom technique, is listed here. It's a link. I highly, highly recommend this if you're interested in that. It does have a free, some free scripts. So what this app has is dozens and dozens of different scripts for different conditions, anxiety, sleepiness, sleep issues, different health issues and things. You'll tap through the different acupressure points as you go through the script. So they've done a lot of that for you. Insight Timer, which I think I'm not familiar with the one that Bruce mentioned, the Sam Harris, but Insight Timer is wonderful for mindfulness, meditation, anxiety, stress, sleep issues. But that's it, everyone. So thank you for hanging in till the very end. This was a heavy topic, but a lot of very important information that'll help us understand ourselves as well as others, and hopefully be more open and curious and compassionate for others and their experiences as well as our own.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
It was great.
That was
Really
amazing,
great.
Nancy. Thank you so much. This was a tough book to tackle. And when you volunteered to do it several months ago, we're like, we can't think of a more perfect person than Nancy to do this. So, and this spreadsheet is wonderful. Somebody asked where we're going to post this. In the book club, we do most of our interaction on Facebook. I know some of you guys aren't on Facebook, but even create a fake account and come join us, because we talk about the books, we post links, we post spreadsheets like this. We have one on secular traditions now that a lot of us are on, not so much doing the religious traditions. So we kind of crowdsource. What do you do now about holidays or events or milestones? So this is going to be like that, where we can kind of all share and help each other. And this will be under the featured tab on our Facebook page. And I can probably email it out to some of you that just interact with us via email, but and maybe I'll do that every couple, it wouldn't be a real-time update like it will be on Facebook. So this is going to be excellent. So I'd also like to add my little plug for Noah Rashada's Secular Buddhism. We've read both these books, one in book club, one in the Mormon Stories book club. And he has an amazing podcast called Secular Buddhism. And this is extraordinarily helpful. And I found it extremely interesting. So if anyone wants to check out any of his work, he is amazing. I also wanted to mention how we kind of talked about, could we implement some of these modalities into our parenting? And on the Mormonish podcast that Landon and I do, we interviewed, she's actually a member of the book club but not here today, a wonderful mom named Monique. And she said that she had created what she calls a magic routine in the morning that she does with her children. So the M is for meditation. they do some meditation together. And the next one is for, let's see, affirmations. They say some affirming statements to each other as a group. Then they share things they're grateful for. That's G for gratitude, M-A-G. Y, they put a Y in there instead of an I, is yoga. They do yoga together. And then they think of acts of kindness, that's the K, that they can do for others throughout their day. And they do this every single morning. And these kids are all 12 and under. And I'm just thinking, how amazing for you guys that you're starting, this practice, and it's really ingrained into what they do. And they do it as a family. They do it together. So the magic routine, I just thought that was amazing. And all of us can come up with things like that for ourselves personally or family members to do together. Anyway, the possibilities are endless. So I'm really excited about the spreadsheet, and this has just been a wonderful discussion, and thank you for being so open and sharing and vulnerable. I think we all just learned so much from each other because a lot of us, we've gone through experiences that not everybody can understand, but collectively as a group, we get it. We don't even have to say it kind of to each other. We know what we've been through, and we know where we're trying to go together. And that, I think, is the best part. So that being said, let us have Kevin tell us a little bit about our next book very quickly. This is a good one coming up next month.
We'll distract him. All right. So yeah, the book for next month is Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. He's a cognitive psychologist, so it's kind of one of those informative, deep thinker styles of books. And he's very optimistic. A quote from him is, "There can be no question of which was the greatest era for culture. The answer has to be today, which is until it is superseded by tomorrow." So the whole book just kind of presents a view that we live in a great time, that there's been no better time to live, and that we've been progressing, and we're going to continue to progress. So I really like his view on how he presents this. One thing I get tired of listening to a lot of it's belief. I hate hearing the argument, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and look how evil the world is, and how godless our society is, and everything's going to be terrible, and it's just getting worse. And so he really does a good job presenting with numbers why that is not the case. It is it's a pretty long book. I think it's about 20 hours. So if you haven't started it, better get started soon, because it's a long one. I read it a while ago, and I'm just going through it again, and I'm only about halfway through. And there is kind of a lot of chapters there, and so I don't know how in-depth we'll be able to get, but if you have certain things you want to talk about, be ready to share those, because there's a lot. So anyway, that's the book for next month, and it'll be fun. Long book though, so get ready.
So I will say, when the books are this long, please read what you can. If you cannot finish, that should never deter you from coming to the discussion, because it's all a catalyst for a topic. And this is a great topic, because ever since I was little, I've heard that these are the most wicked, evil last days. So for the last 50 years, it's been 50 plus years, it's been the wicked, evil, last, horrible, and that just, I'm not sure if that's really true. So this book is going to delve into that. So please, if you can't finish the entire 20 hours, find a summary online, watch a YouTube channel. I'll even post some things on Facebook. Read as you can, and just come to the discussion, because that's where the really good stuff happens. So I think we have one more slide very quickly about how to connect with us. If you're new and you don't know how to connect, if you're not on social media, you can just send me an email to thegoodbookclub@mail.com, not Gmail. And I will put you on our mailing list, and we'll send you links and information about upcoming events. Like I said, most of our activity takes place on the Good Book Club Facebook page, and that's our header there with the books. And if you find us there, we all talk amongst ourselves, and we put links and stuff under the featured tab. So that's really where we have the bulk of our interaction. We're also on Instagram, where we can DM you links and things. And I've also made a little push into TikTok. We'll see. I'm not quite sure I understand it. So if you know any teenagers, please tell them to call me, because I need help. Anyway, if you do email me and I email you back, check your spam. For some reason, mail.com always goes to spam, and we wouldn't want you to miss out on any of our events. And then the next thing that we do, I know we're always trying to get this 3-hour block, right? It's ingrained in us. We must communicate for 3 hours, but I find that most of us just want to stay on and talk. So we have sort of a little mix and mingle. We turn off the recording and we just get to know each other and talk. Now, unfortunately, today, and usually Landon is on here too to facilitate. Both of us are doing a taping for Mormon Media Reviews at a bookstore. So we have to sign off, but Bruce is going to be our moderator. You don't even need a moderator. You just hang out and talk. So the only part about this mix and mingle that doesn't work is that there are no snacks, right? We're all ingrained in the Mormon world. We should be bringing our green Jell-O or our chips and dip. So go get your own, bring it back, and hang out and talk. And we will see everybody next month or in between. So thank you. It was wonderful.